Well, thank you. I'm excited to be the penultimate speaker for the year, but I can't promise the pain will stop now that I have the floor. So first, I want to thank Rick Pack for inviting me to speak with you. Rick is an absolutely fantastic person, and I am so privileged to get to work with him every day, almost every day, and sometimes on the weekends, which I like to ask him to stop, but you know, I don't have that control. Not going to go a lot into SQL. I will touch on it a little bit. I'm not what you would probably consider a traditional programmer or coder, but I do want to talk about not only a tool I use at work called Alteryx, but how I got to this point where I'm using Alteryx in my day-to-day. So my title is I'm the Value-Based Care Analytics Program Manager. I'll get into what that actually means a little bit later. And as you can probably tell from the slides, I work at LabCorp. Just a light disclaimer, I do work for LabCorp. I handle patient-sensitive information, so you don't get to see any of the fun stuff today, which is, a shame, but the law. And then my access to Alteryx and Tableau is through my employment, so I just want to I want to throw that out there, and I'm not endorsed by Alteryx or Tableau in any way. I just absolutely love working with these softwares and really love preaching about them as much as I can. So really want to talk about where my data analytics journey started to try to show how I evolved from working at the lab bench to working with data in the modern sense, where I'm creating algorithms and workflows to analyze data. So I have a PhD in genetics and molecular biology, and I had a strong interest in cellular architecture, particularly during cell division. I was and still am obsessed with microscopy. Put me in a dark room with a giant microscope, I could sit there for hours and just be as happy as can be. And what I really liked doing was creating quantifiable data from pictures and movies. So what I'm showing on the screen here, do I have a cursor? Sorry, I'm just trying to get my laser pointer. There we go. So this is an OMX ultra resolution microscope. It is larger than your standard refrigerator. It towers over me. And what you do is you place a microscope slide in this tiny little opening, you close it up and go to the computer. With this microscope, I was able to capture images at incredibly high detail, and very proud of the fact that one of those images made the cover of a research journal when we submitted an article talking about the mechanics of cell division and how the two resulting cells physically separate at the end of division. So what you're seeing here is the absolute final contact point between two daughter cells. But I just love the fact that, something I was so passionate about, I have something to show for it in this article. So thinking about how I treated analytics then versus how I treat them now, then it was very hypothesis driven. A lot of experimental design, following the scientific method, reading hundreds of peer-reviewed journal articles on the topics to make sure that my hypothesis held water. And then it's generating data through the experiments that I planned out to try to assess the validity of my hypothesis, or whether it was just completely wrong, which oftentimes your hypothesis being proven wrong leads to something a lot more scientifically interesting. And one thing I really enjoy about the academic environment is you have to justify your hypothesis, your experiments, and your results to peers. And your peers can challenge you and ask you to do additional things to show that you are really taking an unbiased look at your research. But where I am now, working more with data, it's very data driven. This is data that already exists. I don't have a hand in how it's created. It's satisfying requests from colleagues, from clients, people who are sales representatives who make promises to a new client, and we have to find a way, can we satisfy those promises? Utilizing existing data. I really like to try to tell stories with data, and I find that I can still do that. And then what I've learned is you have to meet the needs of users, and you have to set their expectations, because they may not be able to critically assess your work, whether you did it correctly, whether you used best practices. So a lot, yes?
Just wondering if you have any need to sanitize or obfuscate any of the data based on personally identifiable information and things like that.
All the time.
And maybe in deference to what your colleagues are looking for.
Yeah, so that does bring interesting point. We are working with patient data. This is sensitive information. We have a very close relationship with our legal department, so we understand what do we need to do to make sure that what we're sharing is appropriate. Usually a doctor is allowed to see their own patient's data, but the person that doctor works for may not. It's following that paper trail of permission. So when you sign a form at the doctor and they say, oh, can we reach out and get your information, that's a paper trail we need to work on. Internally, everyone at LabCorp undergoes HIPAA training. So generally for something that's internal, we don't have to be worried about it. We need to be very careful and very transparent about what we can and can't provide. So yeah, some of my projects, we will be sharing patient identifiable data, but to the providers, to the doctors. And then other projects, like one of the many that Rick and I work on together, is there are going to be no patient identifiers. I think the closest thing we're doing is showing what zip code they live in, which even then we had to get legal clearance. So just kind of going back to where I started, and this was a very nostalgic talk for me to put together, but I was really interested in cell behavior, the physical architecture of the cell, how two cells touching each other interacted, what happened to a cell when it was moving in its environment, when it was migrating, and then undergoing cell division. I'm not going to bore you with the biology, but I just wanted to throw up some pictures. On the left is from my graduate publication, where I was looking at a mutant version of a protein critical in cell division actually disrupted cell-cell borders when cells were not dividing. So one of the first, it was the first documented evidence that this protein had a function outside of cell division, which was really exciting. And then on the right, they're just some images of the cellular architecture. These are the microtubules and how they change throughout the stages of cell division. And these were actually images I sent to an artist friend of mine. She's based out of California, and she turned some of these images into art, which was really cool for me. And then I started getting a little bit more sophisticated with how I thought about my data. How do you compare two objects that are moving through time and space? I was interested in cell migration. I wanted to compare a control set of cells and a mutated set of cells. But how could I measure that and measure it with confidence and in a way that I could prove to my peers that there was an actual difference? So on the top left, you're looking at outlines of different migratory paths that cells took. So one thing you can do is you can measure the distance that they traveled. You can measure the speed. One thing that was really fun for me, and a nice throwback to trigonometry days, was looking at the directional change. So what angle did a cell turn when it decided to start moving in a different direction? And I really enjoyed working on this because at the time there was not a lot of consensus in the literature on how to measure that, how to measure directional change when cells are migrating. But then, how do you factor in limitations in the data generation? When I'm making movies of these cells, I could only do 5-minute intervals. It was really difficult to image them more frequently. So what information am I losing in those 5 minutes? How do I account for that? How do I try to work around it, find different ways to study it? And now I think about, we have these data sets that we don't have a lot of control over how they're generated. We have a lot of missing data. How do we handle that? And then, the final thing I started to think about is, how do you account for human error? A lot of these images, at least at my skill level, required some manual coordinate generating and manual calculations. So I'm only human. The people that create the data that I work with now are mostly human. We do have a lot of machines now at LabCorp that automatically generate the data, but we always have to say the data we have, it's really only as good as what the doctors provide us when they send a patient to us for testing. So this is a slide I threw back in because you and I were talking earlier about MATLAB. What my exposure to MATLAB was taking advantage of GUIs that other people had created for my specific problems. And one of them specifically was for this section at the bottom was how do I look at microtubule growth and decay in a cell? So you use a virus, you label the growing ends of microtubules, and then you image them at, I think it was 2-second intervals. You throw those images into MATLAB, and they tell you all of these different parameters related to microtubule growth and destruction. So that's my one shout out to MATLAB, and apologize that it's not more exciting.
That is exciting because there's this guy who believes that the microtubules and the resonance of the microtubulars of interconnections in our brain is actually what is all of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And just a little fun fact about microtubules, one of the enzymes that causes microtubule shortening is called katana. So scientists have a lot of fun with naming the genes and proteins. The flies have the most fun. They have Sonic Hedgehog. And then zebrafish, and this was my last example, they have Tin Man, which is a fish that doesn't have a heartbeat. Surprisingly, it lasts longer than you'd think. I'm going to see, this is a video crudely taken from whatever cell phone I had 4 years ago. But this is kind of the peak of where my imaging, my microscopic imaging went, where I was taking images of 3D tissue, and I was taking them, if you imagine, you have this notebook. Imagine this is my 3D tissue. Each page in this book is an image I can take. So I can create what's called a stack, where I have a stack of images. And then in this software, was able to create a 3D reconstruction of that tissue. And what I was looking at and what you're seeing marked in green are that final contact point between dividing cells. And this was really important in early brain development because it defined, are the cells becoming the right types of neurons? And timing and positioning was everything. So you're seeing how those daughter cells were positioned during brain development was really interesting. Let me see. There we go. And it cannot play. What I'm going to do, because I was so excited to find this video. Again, cell phone image, but this is me basically clicking and dragging and just moving through this 3D reconstruction. The blue, that's the cell nucleus. So I'm basically able to look at the 3D cell tissue based off of 2D images I captured. So that was really exciting for me at the time, and thank you for indulging me in showing that. So, enough with the science, enough with the lab bench. That's not my life anymore, although the only thing I miss is the microscope. Where do I think now? I talked about being data-driven, really focusing on what the users are requesting. How do I best use existing data? How do I treat it properly? So how did I convert my skills from the lab to skills in the corporate world and the healthcare world? Well, one, that was part of the motivation for getting those other 3 letters at the end of my name, the MBA. But also doing a lot of networking, talking to a lot of people, a lot of interviews, not job interviews, but just learning what was out there in the workforce. In grad school, where I came from, you're not taught how to do anything other than run a lab. But 85% of graduate researchers leave and go into the corporate world. So this was part of me learning how to move away from the lab. What I did was I thought about experimental design. What am I going to do? So that really helped me learn how to best do requirements gathering. My hypothesis, that really became my use case. And now every time I have a new idea, or my colleagues have new ideas, the people I work with, I put together a data story. Why is this product needed? Who is going to use it? What questions is it going to answer? What actions can be taken? So really just putting together that framework. Instead of generating my own data, I focus on understanding the existing data. What did each attribute mean? What did each field mean? How did it get entered? How did it get transformed as it passed through all of the different infrastructure systems that LabCorp has? I really took all the best practices I learned in statistics and visualization, and it really helped me with setting expectations with the users, making sure what they understood if they were asking for something that was inappropriate or not feasible with the data, and also designing solutions that could be easily understood by people who aren't going to have the background that I do or you all do. And then, part of what I'm doing now is something I did a lot in grad school, was giving presentations, and really building that experience with communication, talking to different audiences, has really helped with communicating with other people in the company. If we're in different areas of the business, being able to have that interdepartmental communication is something that I really work on and want to keep working on as I learn more. So I want to talk a little bit about how much data can be generated for one person when they get their testing done at LabCorp. When you have your sample collected from you, we get information about the order. What is the doctor asking to be tested? What tubes should your blood be going into based off the tests? Then that sample needs to be transported. So we have courier routes, we have flight patterns, we have different labs all over the country, so knowing which is the appropriate one to send the sample to. We have a step that's called accessioning and processing. So that's creating serial IDs for the samples and splitting out the one tube of blood into dozens of little tubes of blood, depending on what testing needs to get done, and then routing it to all of the different labs and specific departments for the different testing that takes place. Then you have the actual testing, the actual bench testing, where whatever your doctor ordered for you gets performed, and that creates result data. Rick, I'll send this to you. Oh, okay. And then at the end you have the results. The results have been generated by the lab. They need to be sent back to the doctor, and then they're also sent into our own internal archives, and that's what Rick and I use to do all of our work, basically. So, you want me to go back?
No, yes, actually do.
Okay.
I know we're on recording, being recorded.
Okay. I'd do anything for Rick. I just want to make that clear.
Oh, so
this is more of a visual way of putting it, but also showing how complex it can be. So you have your patient. They go to the doctor. The doctor orders 2 tests, but is it really 2 tests? Order number 1 is actually a really complex test that consists of 10 individual tests. And that will end up with 10 results if you're lucky. And there can be a lot more data after that depending on how those results are represented. And then order 2, yeah, it's a really simple test. You're just going to get 1 result. So, we can't send the doctor the result information, the way we store it. So what are the different ways we can report those results back that can be meaningful? So, we can have that result data delivered directly into the software used by doctors. Hospitals and doctors' offices have specialized software that, we can send the data straight into. We have automatically generated PDFs. These are patient-level reports that show, here are the results, here are the references, if your blood sugar, if you're diabetic, here's how you rank, here are some actions that need to be taken. So these are customized reports. We also have, really basic reports that, look like they were, typed up on something from the early 90s, Courier new font. And then we're delving into patient apps. So there's now a patient mobile app where you can get your results directly. But what we're doing with Alteryx, we're not looking at what can we give the doctors, what can we give the patient, but what can we give the leadership at these hospitals, at these doctors' offices, at these large health networks that need to make sure their entire population is taken care of. It's a lot more difficult for them to pull out the results on an individual patient basis. And what I do with Alteryx and what Rick does with R, we can create interactive reports that go to the organizational leadership and they support the patient populations. This is becoming really important now as the U.S. government is changing how providers get reimbursed. So they have to make sure you only, and I'm just throwing out a random number, so please don't quote me, only 5% of your patient population can be diabetic or we're not going to reimburse you. So you're incentivized to make sure that you don't have pre-diabetic patients progressing into diabetic patients and risking your reimbursement. But more specifically, how has Alteryx empowered me? So as you can see from my background, I never really learned to code. That wasn't something that was an interest of mine. I was always fascinated by it, but it never really applied to the kind of data I was generating. But what I'm able to do with Alteryx, I can quickly implement data logic and rules to create algorithms. I'm able to easily validate the output from these algorithms because I understand the use case. I work with MDs, I work with our clients to figure out what do they need, how do they need to see it. So it's a really quick turnaround when it comes to creating the algorithm and making sure, is that algorithm going to work? So I'm able to do this data massaging and report creation in tandem. Make an adjustment in the Alteryx, and then I open up Tableau, which is the visualization tool I use, and see, how is it working. I'm able to implement really complex logic that otherwise would require knowing SQL, Python, Java, R, other coding languages. I don't know any of those. A little bit of SQL, and I'll show you the peak of my SQL abilities. I can really easily pull in reference data from multiple sources. So the one example or walkthrough I was going to show with Alteryx has to do with census data that I've pulled from a few different places online. And then really my end game is to go into Tableau, and I've built up my knowledge of Tableau enough to know exactly what output is going to work best for Tableau, so I can optimize my algorithms for my visualization tool. So I hinted to it. here is the absolute peak of my SQL abilities, which is joining 3 tables together to get a list of specimens that met one status value. The peak. And I was so proud of this, self-taught SQL. But now with Alteryx, I am able to put together, these really expansive, complex workflows. And this one is looking at patients that that may be diabetic, may have chronic kidney disease, but also look at when was the last time they got tested? Was that too long ago? Are their providers not testing them frequently enough based on what their disease state is? Are they getting worse? Are they getting better? And able to do a lot of that. Alteryx is really cool. And again, not endorsed, but when you first install Alteryx, they give you a favorites tab. You've never used it before, but here's a favorites tab, and it's just based off what they've gotten feedback for. But I do find a lot of these features are really where I stay. So there's a browse tool. This is something that lets you view your data, look at high-level summaries. There's data cleansing. This can clean out white space and clear out nulls. One thing I deal with a lot is our data passes from a Unix database to an ASCII database, and that creates a lot of white space. And so this data cleansing tool is really nice for cleaning that up. I use the filter tool a lot. This is really good for isolating records of interest or getting rid of records that are unnecessary. The formula tool, this is probably the feature I use the most. This is where I create the logic and rules for my algorithms that I later use in visualization. I'm very grateful that it is largely SQL based, so the bare minimum I taught myself when I was in IT has been beyond sufficient for me to create some really nice formulas here. The sort tool is really nice if I'm interested in looking for what's the highest or lowest value for a patient, and we have 10 records for one patient and 5 records for another, and I just want to isolate what's the most recent time they had testing done. That's a really nice tool. You have some standard ones that may be familiar to SQL users. There's a select tool. There's join tool, there's a join multiple and a union, and those are really great. The summarize tool works a lot like the group by syntax in SQL. But what's really useful for me is, I don't work in a vacuum. I work with other people. I want other people to be able to validate my work and use my work. So I rely a lot on this comment box. I'm able to annotate my workflows and say, this is what this section is doing, or if you want to use this workflow, here are the instructions. If you need to update it, here's where you can do it. I even use it to leave notes to myself if I have a work in progress. I can make a to-do list of features I need to add. And then there's some developer tools that really help you with your outputting. So I promise there's no PHI on this, so no one freak out. So this kind of is an example of when I talked about there's a lot of white space. Sometimes you'll end up with really granular information. It looks like it's in a tabular format, but it's housed in a string field. So what you see up here, it's a string field, but really looking at it, it's tabular. You're looking at a patient history. And what I was able to do using Alteryx was create that table, look for patterns in it. So I was able to assign the snippets of each string to the appropriate column. And the tool I use for this is regex, regular expression, and what it does, it will actually find specific patterns. And I also use this for parsing out diagnosis codes. Rick has done a really good job in giving us diagnosis codes, but they're in a string. You can have 10 diagnosis codes that a provider tagged with an order, and sometimes you want to list them all out if you want to see what diagnosis codes are being used the most. I have a regex formula that recognizes the pattern of diagnosis codes and will pull them all out for me, regardless of what the punctuation is. What's really nice is, I'm able to output my data into almost anything. Excel, and that's a popular one because we have a lot of people that are just really interested in an Excel list. We have some people that use Access, so you can output directly to Access. You can write or append or overwrite tables. And I've mentioned I use Tableau. This can write directly to a Tableau data extract file. So it can really package up an output that Excel otherwise wouldn't be able to contain. So I talked a lot about what I've done with Alteryx, but we have, very soon it's going to be 50 users at LabCorp. And part of what I do is I help support all of them. So they're very kind in sharing with me what they use Alteryx for. So what's possible is they can do some data pulls from a server that are more efficient than using Access by directly connecting Alteryx to a database, and it lets them run this job in seconds and minutes as opposed to hours. Other departments have reports that need to be created, so those can be automated and done more efficiently. There's a lot of reference data that needs to be refreshed on a regular basis. Our departments do a lot of internal auditing, making sure we're charging the right price, getting paid the right amount. So they're able to automate their internal auditing, and they're also able to start doing some custom reporting that they previously did not have time to do because they were doing things a lot slower. We're also able to better maintain our client data. So a lot of times we have to rely on our sales representatives in the field to tell us who their clients are, what the addresses are, and it can change. Addresses can change. So Alteryx has a feature that will standardize the addresses. You can do something called a fuzzy match, where it will allow a certain amount of mismatch in two records. So you can bump up data a little more. You can have more flexibility in that. We can do geocoding. There are ways to more accurately assign geospatial information to addresses. So this can be useful for our courier operations. We have a lot of interest in creating heat maps for various use cases. Alteryx is really great at transforming data. So you can take data and flatten it. You can use text to columns. If you have a CSV, you can parse it out. You can really get it to format however you'd like. And then one real benefit, one of our power users has had is they're able to take large data sets that previously she couldn't work with because it would just take her days to extract it. But she can now directly export that data using Alteryx into the Tableau data extract, which can hold more data than an Excel file, and do further visualization on it. So I talked a lot about visualizing. So what I work on in terms of visuals, these are reports that help make sure our clients are ordering the right test at the right time. And sometimes it's for the right cost. So it's a very altruistic group I'm a part of, and I really enjoy being part of a group that doesn't always care about making money. So what we do is we really focus on what guidelines are doctors expected to adhere to in taking care of their patients. So are they ordering tests that are not recommended based on guidelines, which can affect their reimbursement rate? So for women and men, there's certain screening, cervical cancer and prostate screening. There are age guidelines where if you're above a certain age, testing is not recommended, but doctors may still order it. So we have a report that allows the clients to really hone in on who's ordering out of guidelines. Is it a systemic problem, or is it just a few people that maybe we can just have a phone call with, or is it something that we've implemented a change, and can we track that over time? Can we see if we're getting better? Can we see if our doctors are being responsive to what they're doing? Sometimes doctors order the wrong test, tests that are just named too similarly but have very different reasons, or tests that are no longer the right technology. So sometimes, in this example, a blood test isn't the standard of care. It's not accurate. We know more about the bug Helicobacter pylori. We know that there are different types of sample collection, different types of testing that are accurate and do answer the questions, but people still order the blood test. And then one of the exciting reports that I really enjoyed working on was looking at testing efficiencies. So some of our tests are smart. They do test number one, and depending on the result of that test, either testing will stop or it will continue if result one was abnormal. So it's considered a smart reflex. And we have a report that shows how much testing could have been avoided if a smart reflex had been ordered instead of every test at once. So really showing our clients opportunities to reduce inappropriate or unnecessary testing. So I thought we could jump into some demos. Since I have the softwares on my computer, we could look at Alteryx and or Tableau, whichever would be of interest. So unless I hear any dissenting or unless I'm not good on time.
You're fine on time.
Okay. So we'll start with Alteryx. So this is something from a recent problem I had where, why is it not showing? Sorry, my screen, I see what happened. This is what I get for bragging earlier about being so good at setting up presentations. So this is Alteryx. This is a workflow here that solved a problem I had a few days ago where I needed census data by zip code. Now, I had the census data for every zip code in the United States, but it was organized by census tract, which I would prefer using for heat mapping, but a lot of sales reps really want to see zip code. That's really that's part of the communication that needs to happen with people who make requests and the people who perform the requests. So I'm hoping to get them to convert to census tracts, but for now we're showing them zip code. So that's this data input right here. So this is the Food Access Research Atlas. I found it using a Google dataset search. It has census information as well as a lot of socioeconomic factors for those different census tracts. Like I said, I needed it aggregated by zip code, and I needed those zip codes for a specific state. So I found another reference file on the internet that mapped the zip codes to the census tracts. And then I have the zip codes for the state of Maryland. So what I did first, and I'm not trying to say my way was the best way or the most efficient way, but it got me where I needed. So what I first had to do was a select statement just to make sure that the two fields I was joining on were the same data type. So I just set them both to string. Nope, I set zip code to integer. So when I did the join, and this join tool is just so user-friendly. So you basically tell it what fields you want to join on, and then you end up with almost a select option over here where you can change the type, you can rename fields, and then once you do the join, you can choose your output. Do you want the left join, do you want the inner join, or do you want the right join? So in this instance, I wanted the inner join. I just wanted the census tracts for zip codes in Maryland. Once I had that, I was able to join it to my census and socioeconomic data. So joining this time on census tract. And whenever I set up a new join, I'm always checking my work, and I put a browse tool on all of my possible outputs. And if I intend on using this further, I'll remove those. But what's really nice about these little binocular tools is I can see really quickly, okay, 100% of states have a value. This field, it says 100%, but I'm seeing a little problem. Okay, so it's telling me that the display rounded it to 6 decimals. Okay. If it wasn't okay, it would tell me, how many records it thought were bad or null just by hovering over it. I'm going to click on state. Now I have this little visual over here telling me the frequency of each value in this column for, I think, the top 20 values. So there's 8,044 census tracts in California, and it goes down there. So I really get a lot of use out of this tool just to do a high-level check on my data, whether it's the first time I'm looking at an input or after I've applied some logic to it. It's just a way for me to check through at a very high level. And then I have my output on the other side was nothing there, which is what I wanted. I was hoping that every census tract from the state of Maryland was in my food atlas census and socioeconomic input data. So that's what I expected to see. That's why I put a browse tool on all of my outputs. So what I really wanted was that inner join. And after I checked with the binoculars that the inner join had all of the columns I intended it to have, I set it to output. And because this was just a one-time thing I needed to do, I went ahead and just output it as an Excel file. And this Excel file actually ended up going into another workflow in Alteryx. So that's really the only example I legally can show you in Alteryx. But I do have de-identified versions of the Tableau outputs that I can show. Because we give these presentations a lot, and we just got to make sure that we can show them and not worry. So this is Tableau. This is a Tableau output, and it really depends on what does the person expect to see in the end. How are they going to use it? Right now you're seeing a bunch of white spaces because I designed this to be printed on letter paper. What if they want to print out this report for a specific doctor location and use it at a meeting? So there's a lot of white space, but they can be formatted to all different kinds of sizes. This is an example of two tests. They're very similarly named. One is very common, very cheap. The other is not necessary majority of the time, and it's also really expensive. But wouldn't you know it, 125 shows up first alphanumerically on the list compared to the 25. Which one's the more expensive one that is really needed? The 125. So this is a known problem that happens at different hospitals, different locations and organizations, and some have even removed that 125 test from their ordering system. And if you look at this, it's really nice. Over the course of a year, almost all of the tests ordered were that appropriate vitamin D test. But you still have 186. And you have the nice trend over time. It's really hard to see. It doesn't look like anything's going on. But down here, you have one provider. And I can hover over and I can see, wow, that doctor ordered the wrong test for 126 people. What are you doing? So we can look at that. Where is 96? If I can remember how to use my own work. See that? I deselected, all the data went away. I selected, it came back. So now you can see this guy has been ordering a lot. And it looks like he's only ordering. And it is de-identified, but it's technically real client's data, and the insider info we got is that this is just a regular family practice. So really no business ordering that. So that's really a phone call. You call that doctor and say, look, you're ordering the wrong test. Can you please be more mindful? And there are some clients that, they take care of the underserved population. And so really every dollar matters, even if it's just one doctor, causing a ruffle. This is a really good place to try to make sure as much money is saved as possible.
So on that, what methods do you use to try to figure out, hey, this is something that maybe is being ordered incorrectly, mm-hmm. or that I think they really mean this thing when they say this thing? What do you use? Is that all just domain knowledge, or?
So really it's very careful wording. We don't want to suggest that a doctor is doing something wrong. That's not our place. We can say, look, this is unusually high volume. These are the patients. These are the diagnosis codes that the doctor used. And then you give that back to the organization and let them make the decision. Was this appropriate or not? So yeah, it's really delicate. So we are very careful about how we word it, how we communicate it. So I was probably a bit loose with how I described it here. But yeah, when we're having these conversations with clients, we are very careful in saying, this might be possible misordering. This might be a doctor that you want to look into or have a conversation with, or decide that they're doing everything right. It's their call, it's not ours. This one is probably my favorite to show. So this is that report based off of a SMART test, where test 2 is only performed if result 1 is abnormal. Test 3 is only performed if result 2 is abnormal. Otherwise, testing stops. Doctors were trained in medical school to order all 3 tests at once, no matter what. My manager, who I work with to design these, he's an MD, not that long out of medical school. They're still teaching that. But there are clinical guidelines against that, and we offer a SMART test based off those guidelines. So for this client, over the course of a year, they ordered all the tests at once about 32,000 times. And that resulted in almost all of them being unnecessary, where result number 1 was normal, no further testing needed. But test 2 and test 3 were ordered, so they have to be performed. We can't tell them, well, no, that's against guidelines. Why I like to show this is because we showed the client this report in February. And starting in March, you see a change in their ordering behavior, where if I dynamically change the date range, before that demo, there were only a handful of the smart tests ordered. After the demo, 2,700 smart tests were ordered. And you can start to see a decrease in wasted tests and an increase in tests saved. And again, this is the client where every dollar matters. And we showed them an opportunity to be smarter about the testing they ordered, and they took it. And what I'm working on is actually designing a research study. I'm a scientist by nature. I want to study, did we actually make an impact on this client by showing them these reports? Can we attribute these trends to our work and work towards publishing that? Not only for this one, but for some of the other reports, just to show that what we're doing is going to have an impact with our clients and is going to help with overall patient care and that client's ability to get reimbursed. So I can go through the other reports. They all look the same, though. They all tell basically the same story. It's getting close to an hour. What do you think? Questions? Yeah.
So in that regard, can I make the assumption or analogy that just like saving power for the power company is good for both the customer and the power company, that LabCorp also has a benefit from showing the doctor and the patient is benefiting from doing the right tests and the most efficient tests in the most efficient way?
If you could repeat the questions, that'd be great.
Oh, yeah. So if I could summarize, what does LabCorp get out of this? We're telling the doctors order less or order different or order something cheaper because it's the correct thing. In a business, not common to tell your customers to not spend as much money, essentially. But there's a couple of ways that LabCorp does benefit. It's a very relationship-based business where you really want a strong, trusting relationship between the lab provider and the client. We have competitors. We want to make sure that our clients trust us and stay with us instead of go to one of our competitors. And this type of reporting is a way to show them that we can be trusted, to tell them that they're wasting money with their practices. From a more practical standpoint, if they're ordering, for this instance, if there's almost 31,000 tests that they could have avoided, that is operationally, that is wear and tear on our machines that could have been avoided. These were all in a small region. So, whatever lab that's being sent to, that was wear and tear on one lab's equipment. And
so maybe I can summarize what the thought occurred to me, that the less pedestrian test, because it's less pedestrian because it's less typical and less appropriate if you've run the other more appropriate tests, and LabCorp has probably machines staffed and maintained for the quantity expected. And then if somebody's taking a more esoteric test and using it, it's going to cost both people money.
Yeah, so we're spending money on reagents. We're spending money on machine maintenance. And staff on hand. Any other questions?
So you're front-ending on Tableau, and I've seen a bunch of presentations. I'm sure everybody in the room has Power BI and Tableau, and the power is to be able to connect to the back end and dynamically query stuff and be able to manipulate the front end and dig into information. Can you do that with, and I'm sorry, I'm less familiar with the name of the tool and you talk about, but it's Alteryx, right?
Yeah.
Can you utilize Tableau and Alteryx to give you some dynamic capabilities so that if you're in a presentation or you're in a meeting and somebody asks you a question, you could actually run some queries and interrogate it that wouldn't be a prep thing?
Yeah, so I'd say it's more feasible with Alteryx. It's a little bit faster. Tableau is a fun tool. It's nice that you can make things interactive, but in terms of formatting, a lot of work goes into making something look decent. Yeah, off the cuff, Alteryx workflows I've done all the time. In terms of, I don't have access to live database connections. A lot of what I work with are extracts, but we would like to move to a place where we have a user self-service portal where our clients can log on anytime they want and generate these reports with the live connection to the data, as opposed to this extract version that.
And then you would have, though, the security problem of giving them access to just their data, right?
Right. Well, we have a lot of precedents for that at LabCorp.
So you showed us regular expressions with Alteryx. What are some of the interesting things you've been able to do with the product?
With regex?
Not just with regular expressions, but like anything that's really interesting that maybe you solved a really challenging problem using the tool.
Great question. This isn't super flashy, but Alteryx is really annoying in that it won't touch a file if it's being read by any other software. And it'd be really nice if I have multiple outputs to have them all go into one Excel file. So there's this feature that I found out about called block until done. So I can basically tell it, output into the Excel file, then stop reading the Excel file. Output into that same Excel file, and stop reading. I mean, that was one minor thing. There's another thing.
It doesn't support shared grades.
I don't think Excel does.
Yeah, well, that's Microsoft. You would expect other people to be smarter.
There is another one that I was able to do. Let me see if I can find it. There was one report, and I guess I'll just recreate what it looked like. It was awful. It was Dr. 1, test code 1, number of times they ordered it. Test code 2, number of times ordered. And then it would go like Dr. 2 and repeat. And it was just the worst organized Excel file I'd ever seen. And a client came to me and said, I can't use this. And it was even worse than this because we also had the client order codes in there, even practice locations. Sometimes a doctor showed up more than once under more than one order code. And they really wanted to go, okay, how can I just see everything a doctor ordered and just... It was awful. There was no patterns. So really what I had to do was, Alteryx has a feature where you can have a multi-row formula. So it will actually use the positioning of rows in your data in the formula. Actually, let me see if I can find it. Because now that I've remembered I did this, really ugly. So I basically said, if I assigned a row type. So basically, is this row a doctor name? Is this row an account number? Is this row a test code? Is this row a number of results for that test code? And used this multi-row formula and said, okay, if this row is a provider and the row under it is an ordered test, then append it. So basically just a series of appendings and cycling through. I think this whole process repeated over and over. I can zoom out because I couldn't control how many times I had to run it through based on the row organization. Let me see if I run it. This doesn't have any patient data. It has provider names, which are not protected. So yeah, you have the test order. It says test order number and test order name in the count of specimens, but that's really an account number. That's an account name. That's a doctor name. These are the tests ordered. There's another doctor name. There's one test ordered. And it just went on and on and on. It was just awful. And
Those were rows in an Excel file?
yeah. And this is an Excel file that's being provided to clients. So clients are receiving this, and there's nothing they can do with it. Well, no, this was great because I did this the week after I came back from vacation. This was a really awesome way to get my brain working again. Yeah, so what I did was I identified each record. So I looked at the data, figured out what information can I pull out from the existing columns and reliably identify them. So how do I do that? Yeah, so here's a formula. This is identifying, okay, this row is actually a ordered test code. And then I left everybody else null. Filtered out the nulls, kept the non-nulls. This is where I tried to get creative. All of our test numbers are numeric. So, and all of our account numbers are numeric. But their length is what I was after. So I knew that if I could isolate the records that were not numbers, I knew I would have either the account name or the doctor name. So this was just my way of isolating fields with no numbers in it. And then those became the doctor names. And because I had already identified the ordered tests, what I had left were account numbers. Unioned everybody back together. This time I had a row type on each one. Did a little cleaning. This was assigning a record ID, so this was really useful for the multi-row formula. It's also one, I don't know if this is true for other languages, but it's been a while since I've looked at this, so I trust my past self when I made this, but it's been so long that I don't exactly remember how I did, so please forgive me if I don't sound as intelligent as the workflow looks.
That time for typical programmers about 1 week.
Oh yeah.
And it's what was I doing?
Well, really, what was that idiot doing?
Yeah, what was this idiot doing?
Yeah, I try to make sure I can rely on my past self. And I thank my past self all the time. Yeah, so this was probably the most challenging and unique problem I had to solve. But I was very excited, that I finally had it organized very cleanly where I had one row per test order per provider. So instead of that really ugly organization I showed you at the beginning, I was able to get it into something that our client was really happy with. And unfortunately, it's not in my job description to do this for them on a regular basis, but to tell the person that creates the original report that people are not happy. But that's it. It's getting client feedback and making sure that feedback gets to the right person, and offering help.
So actually, a follow-up question on that, since you mentioned rerunning. Are there cases where you do rerun these sorts of flows?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Have you done any sort of automation with this, or like scheduling it to run at certain times, or?
We would like to. That requires a server instance of Alteryx, which we don't currently have, but we're working on.
Okay.
So, for just the desktop license, it is, manually switching out your inputs and switching out your output locations, which I manage a reporting service where we, on a quarterly or by request basis, create reports and send them to our clients. That Rick very amazingly helped us with the operation. So it's still very manual, but it's as efficient as we can get. So yeah, if we are able to get that server instance, we'll be able to publish our workflows up to the server, schedule them. Other people can run them even if they don't have an Alteryx license. So there's a lot of longevity that we'd be afforded if we had the server.
And then when it comes to debugging, you showed off browsing.
Mm-hmm.
What other sorts of tools do you use to help debug these things? I see some of these workflows get a little complicated.
Yeah, they do get really complicated. I don't think my process is very sophisticated. You'll see lots of browse tools. I'll put browse tools on joins, even if I expect a left join to have no records. I put that browse tool there as a way to make sure, do I really have nothing? Sometimes I'll end up with a list of records. I'm like, okay, you guys should all have been flagged by my workflow, yet you have no flags. And then I stepwise go back and search for that unique record identifier at different stages in my workflow. The browse tool has that feature now, where you can search right in that browse, and that's one thing I do. I also use Tableau as a tool for validation, because I need to make sure that the data is going to aggregate in the way I planned it to, and if it doesn't, because I'm comfortable enough with Tableau, I'm more likely to have erred in Alteryx than in Tableau. And you might notice that there's a lot of these gray boxes, these gray rectangles. So these are containers, and every time part of my workflow has a theme, or a series of steps for a specific result, I put that in a container and label it. So if I see a problem with identifying the provider, I know that problem likely occurred in this set of rules. So it's a way of documenting as I work so I can better track down. And then sometimes it's sending a list of specimens to Rick and saying, these aren't looking right on my end, can you please help? Yeah, not very sophisticated, but I do try to think very critically and think, how are the different ways I can troubleshoot this, and try to find out the problem.
Chat has no questions, so if you guys have questions. Sounds like
We have run out of questions for you.
I have, an
Oh, Columbo style, but wait, just one more thing.
if you provoke me, if you poke me, I'll come up with another question. So I noticed that this tool has a visual programming style.
Mm-hmm.
And I have traditionally, throughout my career, loathed visual programming. They've IBM and others have tried, and there's things like Node-RED, and there was way back when Visual
Rational
C.
rows.
There's all sorts of
Symphony.
yes. So UML and
Rhapsody,
and
yeah.
other things that are less of a programming thing and more of a design. People like to look at pictures, but when you're a programmer and you know, oftentimes you have to make updates to your program. You go in, you might get a sense like a roadmap of where your problem is, and know the map and know where to go to look. But the biggest problem was that there are these little pop-ups that you have to know where a problem is, or you have to go from top to bottom and trace through something and look through the visual programming language and have it expand for you. And all that takes a lot of extra time compared to programming languages that are written out in flat format. So given that comment, how do you like visual programming from that point of view? And is there alternative tools that would have given you more of a scripting format where it would condense what you're trying to tell your system to give you?
That is a really great question.
Do you have a negative sentiment of the visual environment at all?
I mean, it's really all I know, so it's hard for me to say whether or not I'd be able to adapt to a non-visual approach. You know, in terms of being able to hunt down problems, I've been able to manage that with this tool. You know, when it runs the job, it creates a log, and you can see there's an error here. You know, if there's a way to log that error in other processes, you know, I'm able to click here and it takes me to the exact tool that had the problem.
So there are two types of errors that programmers run into. One is a syntactic error, where or an execution time, even a runtime error, where the system knows that an error occurred. And then there are logic problems where the programmer actually has to deduce what's going wrong because the output that gets generated is not what they expected. And the latter problem isn't going to have a red error bar on it.
Right, that's the human error aspect, right? Yeah, so, I mean, really, you know, this is where I think I'd really like to see a lot more peer review in my work. I don't like working on something alone with no checks and balances, but you know, I don't really have a lot of resources available to me right now that can support that. But I mean, I don't want to be flippant, but we have legal disclaimers that cover us, you know, just in case there is some human error. We try our best, you know, we try to check it as best we could. I have caught some pretty major problems, you know, throughout this process and have been able to go back and fix them. But yeah, human error and legal disclaimers.
So two questions though. I'm going to start with the second one first because you mentioned legal disclaimer. So is this only being used for auditing in order to help the process, or is it being used to generate patient results?
So these are taking test results that have already been performed by the lab and taking clinical recommendations and seeing, do these test patterns for a patient match clinical recommendations?
Okay, so it's an auditing tool. There's, despite the lawyers, there's not a real risk there of reporting the wrong data to a doctor about a patient.
Right.
Or wrong patient data too. Right answer, wrong patient, or right patient, wrong answer. You know.
Right, and we say, you know, we've done our best. This is the data we had, but you know, it's not our fault if you use this to change your medical decision about a patient. You know, as much as I'd like for these to be perfect and accurate and infallible, you know, they're never going to be. And
The old Treatment should never be based on one test.
Right.
Okay, so the other question was, you said you're not a programmer, but does the tool allow for writing your own little block visual thing? So
I was thinking about the R tool.
Yeah, I don't.
So you can write a script and put it as a block on your own to do things it's not doing already, that would be unique to your data.
Yeah, and I mean, and we've talked.
Is in the same price range as things like Tableau and
No, it's so much
SAS?
more expensive. Yeah, so I mean, it's really cost prohibitive, and that's why I say, you know, I only have access to this through.
That value what something costs, and so as soon as something is really expensive, especially upper management and stuff, they'll go. "This
Oh yeah.
is good."
Yeah, I mean,
That's
as
a
the,
toy.
as
We
the
don't wanna buy
person
that.
that
It only
talks
costs
with all of that
$100.
upper management and asks them what they need, they basically said, we're all in on Alteryx, we'll do whatever you say we should. I'm like, I should not have that power, but okay.
We need to hire 3 more people too.
Um,
Right?
one seat. There's,
Contracts too.
The government is one of those people that won't buy an underpriced product because they think it's a toy.
Well, the government is those people that make the prices go up, and from companies, as soon as you get government contracts, the prices go up.
I think Tableau.
All right. Yes, the sound was gone because I was waiting to see if there were more questions. It sounds like we don't have any more questions. So at this point, I'm going to say thank you so much to Catherine for giving a great talk, showing off Alteryx, showing off Tableau, and a little bit of what LabCorp does and how they can help out their customers. So thanks so much for your time tonight.
No.